So, have you ever tried to look directly at your own eye, but like without using a mirror?
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's practically impossible.
Right. Or imagine a scale trying to figure out a way to weigh itself. It's this sort of impossible riddle. But that exact structural tension, a system trying to observe its own mechanisms, is really the engine behind the stack of excerpts we're jumping into today.
It really is.
Yeah, so for this deep dive, we are looking at this highly unusual, kind of strange manuscript called The Marks of Expansion, specifically styles 118 through 124. And the whole central obsession of this text is figuring out what actually happens when consciousness tries to use language to describe itself.
Which is, I mean, it's one of the most brilliant but also frustrating puzzles in philosophy,
Yeah.
because the primary tool you have to investigate the mind is, well, it's the mind
It's
itself. Exactly. You are trapped inside the apparatus. And what makes the Marks of Expansion so compelling right off the bat is that it acknowledges this trap immediately. It doesn't even try to present a traditional, like, linear argument from point A to point B. Instead, it structures itself entirely like a rhizome.
Right, a rhizome. And just for anyone who hasn't been doing their late night botany reading recently, a rhizome is this continuously growing horizontal root system. So think of ginger or bamboo or even a fungal network. It doesn't have a single central trunk.
Yes, no main tree. In a rhizomatic structure, any point can connect to any other point. There is no absolute beginning or end, right? So the text uses this architecture to explore consciousness through different apertures or lenses.
We're looking through different characters' eyes.
Exactly. Essentially looking through the eyes of these abstract characters. Because depending on where you're standing in a root system, a door might look like a window or it might look like a solid wall.
So instead of a clean academic starting point, the text just throws us right into the messy deep end of human experience. It starts with this aperture referred to simply as X. And X is in a scenario that is probably uncomfortably familiar to anyone listening.
Oh, definitely.
It's 3 a.m. X is lying in the dark. Her phone is glowing. It's warm against her cheek. And she is obsessively waiting for a text message from someone the text calls Dick.
Right, which is a very deliberate choice by the author.
Yeah.
The text is leaning heavily here on Chris Kraus's influential work, I Love Dick, where the actual object of the affection isn't really the point.
Wait, so Dick isn't even the point?
No, Dick isn't a fully fleshed out human being in this scenario at all. He is essentially an occasion for philosophy. The specific person doesn't matter nearly as much as the structural trap that X is caught in.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's the architecture of wanting someone who, does not want you back with the same intensity.
And the physical anchor for that trap is the phone itself. The text brings in the philosopher Avital Ronell here, and she frames the telephone not just as a piece of plastic and glass, but as this deeply metaphysical object. It completely rewrites the rules of presence and absence.
Think about the actual mechanics of what the phone is doing to X in that dark room. I mean, the person she is desperate to hear from is physically located in a completely different time zone. Geographically, she is alone in her bed.
Right.
But technologically, she is entirely exposed. The phone demands a kind of perpetual availability.
Because you're always reachable.
Exactly. You are always theoretically reachable, which means psychologically, you're always waiting. Ronell argues that the phone takes this abstract, existential dread of waiting and turns it into a tangible object you have to, plug into the wall every single night.
You are totally tethered to it. And what's fascinating to me is that X isn't naive about this. The text makes it clear she is highly educated. She's read all the feminist theory about how society conditions women to manage their desires, to, want quietly, to be proper and not make a scene.
She sees it happening.
Yeah, she can see the exact machinery of her own suffering. But, and maybe I'm missing something here, isn't understanding a trap supposed to be the key to getting out of it? Why does having all this advanced critical theory completely fail to protect her from the visceral pain of just being left on read?
Well, that exact gap between intellectual understanding and emotional reality is what X is trying to mine. The text suggests that theory doesn't act as a shield to stop the pain. Instead, the pain itself becomes the raw material for the theory.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's a concept at play here called objection. Objection is the state of being cast out or acting in ways that society deems messy, excessive, or improper. Historically, women have been heavily policed to hide that unrequited, messy wanting. But X does the total opposite.
She leans in.
She leans all the way in. She takes her embarrassing, obsessive 3 a.m. phone checking and decides to use it as a rigorous tool for inquiry.
Okay, so it's almost like reverse engineering a piece of malware. Instead of trying to delete the virus because you're ashamed you clicked the wrong link, you isolate it, you let it run in a sandbox, and you study exactly how it's trying to dismantle your system.
That is a perfect way to look at it, honestly. She refuses to be ashamed of the raw data of her own humiliation.
Mm.
And to process this data, the text introduces Kathy Ecker's concept of the body as text, and this incredible idea of plagiarizing as method.
Plagiarizing as method.
Yeah, so X literally takes the dismissive, hurtful emails and texts she receives from Dick, she prints them out, takes a pair of scissors, cuts them into physical pieces, and rearranges them into something entirely new.
It's physical. She's literally taking the weapons used against her and turning them into raw building materials.
Exactly.
By physically cutting up the words, she disrupts the power dynamic. Like the sentence that made her cry at 3 a.m. gets chopped in half and glued next to a grocery list.
Precisely. She is reclaiming her agency by distorting the very syntax of the rejection. And this reveals a fundamental insight about consciousness itself. Our internal reality isn't some neat, perfectly formatted logical essay.
Definitely not.
It is a chaotic, overlapping collage. It's made of cut-up texts, unrequited desires, half-remembered theories, and raw physical sensations all just bleeding into one another.
So if our internal state is this messy, cut-up collage, what happens when we zoom out? Like if we're a collage on the inside, how does that internal mess interact with the broader world?
That question brings us to the next major conceptual shift in the manuscript. The text moves from the intimate, glowing screen of X's bedroom to a new aperture, a character called C. We move from the internal psychology of desire to the external reality of culture and history.
Okay, a much wider lens.
Exactly. And to navigate this, the text relies on the Martinican philosopher Edouard Glissant and his really profound distinction between the root and the rhizome.
Which connects right back to the architecture of the manuscript itself.
You got it. Glissant fiercely critiques what he calls root thinking. Root thinking is the fantasy that cultures have a single, pure, uncorrupted origin point. It's the belief that identity is this straight line going back into the earth, and any outside influence or mixture is a degradation of that original purity.
It's like arguing that proprietary software is the only valid code, and any open source code that borrows from different developers is somehow corrupted.
That's a great analogy.
But Glissant argues that culture doesn't work like a single taproot, right? It works like a rhizome. It survives through continuous, messy connections. He uses the term creolization, which is the constant, unpredictable mixing of different cultural elements to create something entirely unprecedented.
And the text grounds this with an incredibly resonant example, a grandmother's soup. Imagine a recipe that originated in a specific village, 100 years ago. Over generations, the family migrates. Maybe the original root vegetables aren't available in the new country, so they substitute what they can find.
Right, you use what you have.
Exactly. Maybe the mineral content of the local water even changes the broth. Now, root thinking looks at that modern bowl of soup and declares it inauthentic or corrupted. But rhizomatic thinking understands that the soup is alive.
It's adapting.
Yes, the adaptation is what kept the family fed.
The mixing isn't a failure of the recipe. The mixing is the recipe. And the text scales this up to look at some of the darkest chapters of human history, too. It brings in Paul Gilroy's concept of the Black Atlantic and Achille Mbembe's writings on Afropolitanism. They look at the horrific systemic violence of the Middle Passage. Enslaved people were deliberately stripped of their roots. They were separated from anyone who spoke the same language to intentionally prevent coordination. The goal was total erasure.
The architects of that system believed that by severing the roots, they could destroy the culture entirely. But what actually happened is one of the most profound testaments to human consciousness. The survivors, thrust into this unimaginable horror, didn't just fade away. They took the fragmented linguistic scraps, the available instruments, the fractured memories, and they creolized them. They created entirely new languages, revolutionary musical forms, and complex religious practices.
They built a rhizome out of the ashes of their roots. They survived through radical improvised connection. And understanding that history leads to this fascinating political stance that Glissant calls the right to opacity.
Right.
Wait, let me make sure I'm mapping this correctly. If creolization is the reality of how we are formed, then demanding that someone explain their pure origins is essentially a trap.
Oh, it is entirely a trap. Society constantly demands that people with complex, diasporic, rhizomatic identities explain themselves. Where are you really from? Why do you speak like that? Explain your cultural practices to me.
They want it simplified.
The dominant culture demands transparency. But the right to opacity is the political refusal to make yourself completely legible to a system that just wants to categorize you.
Because categorization is really just a softer word for control. If I can force you to explain your identity in terms that make sense to me, I don't have to do any intellectual work. I've just put you in a neat little box on my shelf.
Precisely. Claiming the right to opacity means saying, my identity is a complex, creolized rhizome, and I do not owe you a simplified explanation just to make you comfortable. You are allowed to be opaque. You're allowed to be a tangled knot that cannot be easily untied by the observer.
This completely reframes how I look at the idea of authenticity. I mean, we obsess over cultural authentic food, authentic language. But if English, our cuisines, our belief systems are all just sedimented records of centuries of creolization, then static authenticity is just a comforting fiction. It's a story we tell ourselves because the reality of constant change is just too dizzying.
It's a defense mechanism against the chaos of history. But the text argues that while the story of purity is a fiction, the physical process of that mixing is undeniable. And to prove it, the manuscript shifts our perspective again.
We get a new aperture.
Right. If X showed us the internal collage and C showed us the cultural collage, our next aperture character U shows us where all of this physically collides. We move out onto the streets of the modern layered city.
And it is incredibly literal. You is just walking down the street to get a coffee, but the text forces you to look at the cross-section beneath U's feet. Like, directly under the pavement is a Roman road. Beneath that, a plague pit from 1665. Deeper still, you have the massive, labyrinthine Victorian sewers built by Joseph Bazalgette.
Yeah.
And somewhere nearby, just sitting in the dirt, an unexploded World War II bomb.
The physical geology of the city mirrors the psychological and cultural layers of the people walking above it. The text uses three specific literary frameworks to dissect this environment. First, it looks at the city through Zadie Smith's lens. She portrays London as this vibrant, polyphonic, multicultural mess.
A beautiful mess.
Exactly. In her city, kids intuitively learn to code switch. They seamlessly adapt their language, posture, and cultural references as they move from the mosque to the corner store to the pub.
It's active creolization in real time. They aren't even thinking about it. Their consciousness is just fluidly navigating the rhizome of the city streets.
But the text immediately contrasts that fluidity with a different lens. Teju Cole's New York. Cole's protagonist is a classic flaneur, detached intellectual wanderer. He walks through the financial district, and because he knows his history, he is acutely aware that he is walking directly on top of a 17th century slave market. He sees the invisible city that most people ignore.
But the text points out the flaw in the flaneur. It's like driving a car with a highly advanced GPS but refusing to check your own blind spots. Cole's protagonist has incredible historical clarity, but he totally deceives himself about his own complicity in the present. He can see the slave market under the pavement, but he ignores his own role as a gentrifier walking over it.
Which perfectly sets up the third and heaviest lens here, Claudia Rankine's brilliant work, Citizen. Rankine shifts the focus away from the distant history buried in the dirt and zeroes in on the immediate accumulating atmosphere of the city. She documents the relentless microaggressions that occur while simply trying to exist in these layered spaces.
The example from the text that really sticks with me is the airport security line. A white woman walks up and just mindlessly dumps her bags onto the protagonist, subconsciously assuming that this black person standing there must be the hired help.
And what the manuscript finds most vital here isn't just the event itself, but Rankine's formal grammatical choices in documenting it. Rankine writes these encounters almost entirely in the second person. She uses the word you. You are in the dark. The woman puts her bags on you.
It's such a brilliant tactical move because when you read a statistical report about systemic bias, it kind of just floats in the air as abstract data. Even if an author writes, I experienced this or they experienced that, it gives the reader a psychological escape hatch. You can say, well, that's terrible, but it happened to them, not me.
All right, you can distance yourself.
Exactly. But the second person you operates like a grammatical virtual reality headset. It forcefully strips away your safe distance. Rankine's use of you drops the reader directly inside the body, experiencing that exhaustion. It forces the reader to carry the sudden, disorienting weight of the moment.
But that concept of weight is exactly where the text pushes us toward the breaking point. Look at the immense load character you is carrying at this threshold. You is trying to hold the messy, unrequited desires of X, the immense diasporic history of C's identity, the literal Roman roads and plague pits beneath their feet, and the accumulating atmospheric weight of Rankine's microaggressions.
That's too much.
The manuscript asks a terrifying structural question. What happens to human language when it tries to articulate all of this simultaneously?
It simply can't do it. The infrastructure of language buckles under the weight. And this is where the manuscript takes a hard left turn. For the final section, styles 121 through 124, the text abandons characters entirely. It stops trying to build a narrative and moves into what it calls residues. We have literally reached the edge of what vocabulary can achieve.
This sequence is where the entire architecture of the puzzle consciousness investigating itself reaches its absolute limit. We start this descent with style 121, named Peniphus. The text frames Peniphus as a ledger. It isn't a new argument. It's an accounting of everything we just read.
Taking stock of the friction.
Exactly. It evaluates which of these philosophical combinations actually created genuine friction and which were just decorative theory. The text compares it to the smell left in a kitchen hours after a complex meal has been cooked. The food is gone, but the lingering atmosphere is undeniable proof that something transformative happened in that room.
Then we drop a level deeper to style 122, seedy sift. And this is where language literally hits a brick wall. On the page, seedy sift is visually represented by empty brackets. Just an open bracket, a space, and a closed bracket.
Because the text recognizes that there are states of consciousness that entirely precede language. To explain this, the manuscript draws on the tradition of apophatic theology.
Right, apophatic theology.
Yeah.
This is the practice of defining something strictly by what it is not. It's like trying to describe a black hole. You can't actually see the singularity. You can only describe the event horizon, the swirling absence of light around it, because any positive word you try to attach to the center just fails.
Exactly. When an experience is too vast or too devastating, applying a standard vocabulary actually diminishes it. So the empty brackets of seedy sift aren't a failure of the author. They are a highly accurate placeholder. They hold the shape of a truth that is simply too large to fit inside a word.
Which takes us even further down into the silence. Style 123 is Shawe. The text describes Shawe as a negative presence. The analogy it gives is the pause between heartbeats. We spend our whole lives obsessed with the beat, the action, the thump. But biological life actually sustains itself in the suspension, the silent electrical reset between the beats. Shawe is that dark region of consciousness before doubt and certainty have even split apart.
And all of that stripping away, the characters, the history, the language, the certainty, it leaves us with a final mark. Style 124.
Za. Za. The text describes it purely physically. It is the literal friction of the teeth coming together to make the Z sound, followed by the sudden opening of the breath to make the A za. It is the literal noise a human makes when they have entirely run out of words. But I have to be honest here. I need to throw a wrench in it and push back on this ending. We just walked through the complexities of feminist theory, creolization, and systemic societal layers, only to end on a made-up two-letter syllable. Isn't ending a dense philosophical manuscript with a sigh essentially just an intellectual surrender? Have we just thrown our hands up and admitted that consciousness is a locked box?
It is entirely natural to feel that frustration, honestly. You want a definitive answer after doing all that intellectual heavy lifting. But the text makes a compelling case that Za is not a surrender. It is a vital acknowledgement. The manuscript references an old Zen proverb. The finger pointing at the moon is not the moon.
Oh.
All of our language, all of our deep dives, all of these theories, they're just fingers pointing at the reality of consciousness. You cannot confuse the vocabulary for the lived experience. Za isn't an ending where we give up. It's a preparation. It's a profound realization that the attempt to understand consciousness, the cutting up of text, the mixing of soup, the walking of the layered city, that attempt is the actual work of consciousness.
Let me see if I have this. If consciousness is that impossible scale trying to weigh itself, the ultimate value of the exercise isn't in finally getting a definitive number on the digital readout. The value is the magnificent, complex machinery of the scale, becoming aware of its own gears and springs.
That's beautiful, yes.
The friction of the attempt leaves a residue. And that residue, the smell in the kitchen, the open brackets, the creolized history, that is who we actually are.
Precisely. The meaning was never going to be found in a static answer. The meaning is generated in the friction of the search. It is about the beauty and the necessity of making the marks along the way.
That completely reframes the entire journey. We started in the isolation of the dark, looking at the warm glow of a 3 a.m. phone screen, and discovered how our most embarrassing, messy desires can actually be rigorous tools for dismantling our own traps.
We did.
We zoomed out into the diasporic soup of our cultural identities, realizing that the demand for pure roots is a fiction, and that we survive by actively creolizing the fragments we are given. We brought all of that down to the pavement, walking the layered streets of the city, feeling the historical plague pits beneath us and the weight of modern microaggressions in the air.
Hmm.
And finally, we loaded so much onto the infrastructure of language that it buckled, leaving us with nothing but the friction of the teeth, the opening of the breath, and the empty brackets of what we cannot name.
It is a massive, sweeping trajectory. And what it asks of us is to recognize the absolute limits of our own understanding, but to do so without ever losing the enthusiasm or the rigor for the search itself.
So, to everyone listening, I want to leave you with something to chew on as you go about your day. The next time you find yourself stuck in the trap of doom scrolling at 3 a.m., or you're tweaking a family recipe because you don't have the authentic ingredients, or you're just walking over a crack in the city sidewalk above a buried history, ask yourself, are you just a passive observer moving through a static world? Or are you actively creolizing the fragments around you? Because you are a totally unique aperture of consciousness. There is no other scale built exactly like you. What does your specific lens see right now that no one else's can? Make your mark. Za.